Okay, sounds good.
Great. And thanks for doing this, Jonathan. It's really great.
Oh, you're welcome.
Probably wait about a minute before we get started. All right. Seems like everybody is coming in slowly, and I think the numbers are plateauing. So I think we'll actually get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the September Coffee Hour. I'm glad to see everybody here today. So my name is Kathy Sung. If you don't know me, I'm the chair of the Educations Committee. And today we have Dr. Jonathan Berg from University of Florida, Department of Pharmacology and Therapeutics. And he's also the chair of the Travel Awards Committee at the ARO. So we're going to be hearing a little bit about how and what the Travel Award Committee expects from the application that is going to be soon due at the end of this month. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jonathan. Thank you for being here today.
Okay, thank you for the introduction and the invitation to be here today, Kathy. I'm very happy to talk about the Travel Award program. So the session, I think, is pretty loosely structured. So the idea is I was going to take you through how the Travel Award schemes work, how we run it at the ARO, and then give some general advice about how I would write an abstract and or structure a personal statement. And I think you'll probably hear lots of different advice from different people. So I know Matt Kelly did an abstract writing session a few weeks ago. I didn't have time to attend that, so hopefully I won't say things that are the complete diametric opposite to what he recommended. But I guess you will hear lots of different advice from different people. So if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to interrupt me, pop questions in the chat, or just speak up. I think if there are things that need clarifying, please just ask. So the goal of the Travel Award program is to really recognize trainee achievement in your research and to recognize that at a society level, so we can highlight our trainees and how they're doing great work, but also to help defray the costs of attending the annual meeting, which can be quite substantial. And some labs have more money than others. So the idea is to really help everyone come and attend the meeting and to show their great research. Typically, in previous years, of course, the last 2 years have been, we haven't been able to travel to go to the meeting, but in years before that, the Travel Award value was set at $500, and that was given as a check when you attended the meeting. We have last year now made a change, so now the Travel Award is $500 for a domestic attendee, but we've been able to increase the value to $750 for international attendees, and hopefully that's going to help defray some of the additional costs that people face when traveling into the United States, like, for example, applying for visas and COVID tests, all that kind of stuff. So I thought I'd start really with telling you how the application process works and how we deal with the applications when they're submitted. And then after that, we'll talk about some general tips about how to write an abstract and the personal statement. So we ask you to submit your abstract. We also ask you to submit a personal statement and your CV, your resume. In previous years, we've also had letters of recommendation from your advisors, but we've dropped that a few years ago now. And hopefully that makes the application process a bit more streamlined. So every application that comes into ARO by the deadline, that gets checked by the head office to make sure that all the materials are there and actually that you meet the criteria. The criteria are that you are not a tenure track assistant professor. So sometimes we get professors applying for travel awards, even though it says pretty clearly in the application, you can't do that. So those have to get filtered out. And then all these applications are reviewed by the Travel Award Committee that consists of myself and then 15 other members from the general ARO membership. And the list is on the web of the members. And I think I saw Cata Velez Ortega online, so she's a member of the committee too. Each application is reviewed by 3 reviewers. So we have a system in place where if you're asked to review an application that is from a trainee that you advise or someone you know very well, we have a system of recusals so that we don't review people who we're in conflict with. But each application is reviewed by 3 independent reviewers. And what we ask them is to assign a score from 1 through 9. We try and emulate the NIH scoring guideline. And 1 through 3, we would say is must be funded this year. 4 through 6 would be try to fund this year. And 7 through 9 would be do not fund this year. So we try and set it into those 3 categories. And then the score is averaged across 3 reviewers. And then we take that score and then we assemble a ranking list of scores from 1 being the highest score down to 9 being the lowest score. The advantage of, not the advantage, the reason we have 3 reviewers is you can imagine that not everyone always agrees. So the idea of having 3 reviewers is that there's more than one person looking at your application. We also stream all of our applications into 4 categories. So we have a graduate student category, a postdoc category, a medical student resident category, and an audiologist category. And all those are treated separately. So if you're a graduate student, you're being ranked amongst the other graduate student applications. You're not being ranked against a postdoc, for example, or an audiologist. So you're kind of kept within those individual groups. And then the pay line that we have for funding applications is also independent to that group. So typically each committee member will review around 60 applications. So when you've submitted them on September 30th, I believe is the deadline, they take a week or 2 to make it out to the individual reviewers. And then we have about a month to go through and review all of these. So read the abstracts, read the personal statements and the CV, and then come up with a number and then do that for 60 times. So it's quite a lot of work, but we get that all done by November 1. And then we try and get you the decision back by mid-November so that you have time to hopefully book your travel if that funding really was a critical element for you attending the meeting. In addition to having the individual travel awards for the 4 categories, postdoc, audiologist, resident, medical student, and graduate student, we also have something called the Don Henderson Award, which was a fund set up by the family of Don Henderson, who passed away a few years ago. And they have set up a fund to essentially fund additional travel awards of a higher value. And what we do is we award those to the top scoring candidate in each of those 4 categories. So if you come at the very top of that group, then you would get the Don Henderson Award, which would be $1,000 as opposed to $500. And we try and make an effort at the annual meeting to recognize those winners in addition to all the other travel award winners that will be coming to the meeting. We have a luncheon at the ARO meeting where all the travel award winners will attend, and ARO will treat you to a nice lunch. And then we also try and get an engaging speaker to come and talk to you about science or career advice in general. So that's the overview. That's an overview of the entire process. If you have any questions about that, please pop it in the chat. But I'll keep going now. So I thought it would be good to go over what I consider to be tips for writing a good abstract. And I say I because I think that maybe what I think is a good abstract might differ from other people. What I will say is I trained as an electronic engineer. So I didn't do biology as my undergraduate or my master's. So I really appreciate abstracts which are kind of clearly written and have been written to take a broad audience into account because they benefit me. I can understand them better. So I really find that helpful. So I think the most important thing really is to think about who your audience is. You're going to have lots of people reading through the abstract book, lots of people walking up and down the aisles of the poster hall. And really, you want an abstract and a title that's going to be clear and catchy so that you can get their attention. Because unfortunately, everyone's busy, everyone's running around. And I think that no matter how good your work is, if your abstract isn't clear and concise and communicating what you've done, what you've found, and why it's important, if you don't hit those key messages, then I think people just naturally float by and don't realize how cool your work is. So the abstract's really important as a way to do that. So I would advise you write it for a general audience. So that means when you're setting in the first couple of lines of your abstract, where you're kind of getting across what it is you want to communicate, you really have to say that in a way which is broad. So for example, if I was thinking about my work, I work on stereocilia, I work on little proteins called myosins and a structural protein called actin that makes up stereocilia. Now, that may be your thing, and you might see that in the title and find that really exciting, but maybe it's not. So I try and start off my abstracts by saying, you know, stereocilia are the mechanosensory organelles in the ear that are required for detecting sound, so that at least hopefully if someone's walking by and they're generally interested in that process, they might stop by to read more about what I work on. And you can imagine you can apply that kind of strategy to other abstracts too. So try and start off with a big general introduction to what you're doing, and what your overall question is. What is it you're trying to get a test in your experiments? Do you have a hypothesis? What is that hypothesis? Or are you trying to disprove a hypothesis? Is there something that's been published by somebody else and you're trying to falsify it? Quite often in the Travel Award abstracts, people don't state their hypothesis. And as a reviewer who only has limited time to read these, if you can imagine all the Travel Award committee members are doing this in their evenings or their weekends, and they've got 60 packets to read through, we don't have a lot of time for each one. So if you haven't stated your hypothesis clearly or what it is you're trying to test, it can actually make it difficult to understand in that limited amount of time. So please do make sure that you state your hypothesis early in the introduction. I think I saw a question come through. As far as I'm aware, this is from Eloise Coops. As far as I'm aware, it is not an option to apply for a travel aboard when you are invited to give a talk at one of the symposia. Yes, so there was actually a case that came up a few weeks ago of an individual, and maybe it's Eloise, who had been selected to give a talk as part of a symposium, but then the application portal didn't take that into account. And yes, I think what we decided for that one is that if you have got selected for a symposium, you are eligible for a travel award, unless the symposium is paying your costs, in which case it would be separate. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, okay, thank you so much.
Great. So ARO has a suggested structure for abstracts. It's quite generous with its word count. So it's 450 words, I believe, or 400 words. That's pretty long for an abstract. Some committees, some societies will only allow 250. So 400 or 450 is quite a lot. In that first paragraph, which is the introduction, you want to try and state, what are you working on? Why is that question important? ARO then says to have a section about methods, which I think can be helpful if you have a particular method that you're working on, or perhaps a new one that hasn't been published before. If your abstract is developing a method, perhaps maybe that one's a good idea to have. If not, if you're working with methods which are more standardized, I would suggest combining the methods and results together. I personally find it when I read abstracts, if it goes introduction, methods, results, I find that a bit more disjointed than just having introduction and then results, and then weaving the methods in as you go along with the results, assuming that these techniques are established and not something that's cutting edge and hasn't been done before. If you're developing a new microscope, maybe having a method section is more relevant to you. So in that method section, if you do have one, I would urge you to avoid jargon. Again, one of the things we see in the abstract review process is people won't define terms. They'll assume things, that you know things. And we have in the past tried to match reviewers to the subject area. We tried last year to match reviewers who, let's say, had a specialty in MRI imaging to an abstract that was doing language processing and MRI studies. The problem we have is that the Travel Award Committee is only 16 people, so we don't really have enough people to assemble panels of experts under that umbrella. So what that means is that you might get someone like me, who's a biochemist, reviewing an abstract about, for example, speech and language processing. So if there are acronyms that you're using, please make sure you define them, because I won't know what they are, as an example. yeah, so don't assume that we know what those words are. Please do define them. In the results section, when I was thinking about what makes a good results section, I thought about, there are two general styles that I've seen. One of them is that you just go through your results line by line. So we tested this hearing, we got this hearing loss, we looked at the hair cells, this is the phenotype we saw. And then at the end of the results, as you go into the conclusion, you would then somehow synthesize that all together, weave it all back together to make your conclusion and what you think you found. That's one way of doing it. The way I think is better is to, and again, people might not agree with me, but I think it's better to discuss your results as you go along, because by the time I get to the end of your abstract, I may have forgotten what your results were earlier. So if you have a result at the beginning of your results section, so for example, we did auditory brainstem response testing on these mice. We found an 80 dB SPL threshold, comma, indicating that these mice are deaf. So you can kind of weave into the results some interpretation so that as a non-specialist reader, I'm still following your story without actually knowing perhaps the intricate details of whether that mouse actually was deaf or not. So you can kind of help the reader going through by sprinkling in bits of discussion as you go through your results section. I've also put here on my notes that some people do put numbers into the abstract. So for example, to use the example of hearing loss again, you might say that the control mice had 45 dB SPL thresholds and the mutant mice had 80 dB, and you'd say that is a significant increase. If you're going to use that language, I'd recommend you at least put in brackets what the stats test is. I think that that's a good practice now, is to really indicate to the reviewer that when you use the word significant, that you're actually thinking about it as a statistical test and that you've thought about that. So please do put the stats test just briefly in the brackets. It doesn't have to be a long description, whether it's a two-tailed t-test or a one-way ANOVA, that's enough to say that, I think. So that's your results section. And I think I saw one more question come in. So this way it would be results and discussion would be in the same paragraph. That's a question from Priyanka. Yes, I think that's one way of doing it. You kind of see that approach in academic journals too. There are the kind of manuscripts like Journal of Neuroscience, where you'd have introduction, methods, results, discussion. And then there are other, the kind of the bigger journals like Science and Nature, they'll allow you formats where you don't have a specific discussion at the end, you weave it in as you go along. So I think what I'm proposing is to have some discussion along the way, and then at the end, you would still have a discussion conclusion paragraph where you pull it all together to make your big conclusion and your take-home message, essentially. So the conclusion I typically only have as 1 or 2 lines, just to kind of synthesize together. Yes, we've studied this protein, it's involved in stereocellular development, and what do you think it means for the future, or how do you think this moves the field forward, or what implications does this have for the field, for example. And I think that makes for a more compelling abstract because you're building my interest as I read through the results. If you save all the cool conclusions to the end, I might get bored along the way. And it might sound a bit flippant to say that, but I really do think that's how people read these things. When people are in a busy environment where there are pressures on their time, you have to build interest with them as they're reading through and not save all the good stuff for the end. And I think based upon that, it might even be appropriate to put some of your results into the introduction. You could say at the end of your introduction what your question is, and then you could say, here we show a role for this protein in this process. So you're already indicating to the reader that you found something cool, and then they have to read more to find out what that cool thing is. I think writing a good abstract really is, if you put it into advertising parlance, it's a hook. You're trying to get someone's attention, you're trying to hook their attention for them to come to your poster or for them to come to your talk. It isn't necessarily for you to get every single detail of your experiment into the abstract. And I think that in that case, I would argue that less is more when it comes to writing an abstract. I think you're better off putting in less of your results, but really taking time to clearly explain them to a general audience and really emphasizing why it's important, how that's answering the question that you set yourself, as opposed to jamming in every single possible bit of data you have and not really providing any context or explanation, then I think that leads to a less clear abstract. If people are really interested, they can come to your poster, they can come to your talk, and then you can bombard them with the totality of what you have, and hopefully they'll find it interesting. So those are the general points I had for the contents of the abstract. I think then there are some other kind of general comments that are, once you've done, make sure you have other people read it. I think what can happen is you spend a few days writing this thing and you get blind to it. You get perhaps even bored writing it and you start to skip read. You don't read every word. And maybe there are some things there that don't make sense. There's some grammar that doesn't make sense, or there's perhaps even the logical flow of arguments don't make sense. So please make sure you have other people read it and take a break from writing it so you can refresh your mind and come back to it with a clear head. Of course, most editors, Word, Google Docs will spell check for you. So make sure when you see a red squiggly line that you look at that because it's telling you something important. And also make sure your co-authors read it. And I think it goes without saying, but just in case it hasn't been said, make sure your principal investigator reads it. So everyone who's on the abstract needs to read it and approve the contents before you submit it, and then read it one more time just to make sure, and then you're good to go. Are there any questions about that general, anything I just said about the general content of the abstract? I hope that was something similar to what Matt said, but maybe not. Ali's nodding. Okay, good.
Dr. Bird, I would just like to add that, just as a reminder, the individual who submits the abstract is the one who is eligible for the travel award. So when you and your co-authors are discussing submission, be sure that that is under consideration, because we don't switch around the travel award per abstract. So if you're submitting it, you're the one that is saying you're eligible for the travel award, just to remind everybody. But no, I also completely agree with what you said, Dr. Bird. The program committee, as well as yourselves, are often looking at north of 1,000 abstracts. So if you want to stand out, do it early on in your abstract submission.
And this kind of also, in some ways, goes towards general manuscript submission to academic journals. I think we've probably all had an experience where you've got this great piece of work, you've written a nice abstract, you send it into a good journal, and the editor won't review it. And you think to yourself, well, what went wrong? Why didn't they even review it? And the likely reason is because the editor has read the title and the first 2 lines of the abstract, and they've decided that they don't want it. And they haven't even read the whole thing. They don't even look at the pictures, as I would. So I think it's that kind of art form of writing a clear and concise, punchy abstract, and the title especially is the way to hook the reader, hook the reviewer, hook the editor, essentially, to get them to look at your work. Okay,
hey,
so that's. Oh, sorry.
Something.
Is
Can
someone?
I say something, JB?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I used to be on the travel award committee, and I just rotated off last year. And I just want to emphasize what Jonathan said about not using too much jargon and making it really, really clear that a general audience who's maybe not familiar with your field of research can understand what you're trying to convey, because I've had it happen to me that I read abstracts that were written really well. It's just that the science was so over the top of my head that I was unable to really fairly, score the abstract, which I think is really, really sad. And I really would advise you all to make your best effort, if you can, to try to write it, for people who may not be in your field of research.
Thank you, Melanie. Thanks for highlighting that. It's good to hear from the opinion of another reviewer who served on the committee that they had the same experience. And I think that goes to speak to the idea that when you state your results, that your cool thing that you found, you have to frame it with context why that's important. Because if you don't tell me that little voxel in the MRI lit up when someone said the word squirrel, I don't know why that's important. But if you tell me why that little voxel represents a brain nuclei that hasn't been involved in this processing of language before, suddenly it makes sense to me. So I think always say your result, but then frame the context of why that result's important. Okay, well, let's move on to the second part, which would be the personal statement. So the application package is the curriculum vitae or the resume, sorry, and the personal statement and the abstract. So the personal statement is much less structured. There is really no one way to write this, but I'll give you some feedback on what I have found helpful in the past when reading these things. We limit you to 300 words, so it really isn't meant to be an essay or one page, I think. So it's really not meant to be an essay. Really, the idea of the personal statement is to give some insight to the reviewer of the person behind the science. So rather than reading an abstract of words, it's really to find out more about you and your journey to this point and your motivation moving forwards. Those are things that we otherwise would have no idea about unless we actually had the opportunity to meet you personally. So the structure is very open-ended, and I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach, because obviously everyone is different and everyone's experience up until that point will be different too. When I think back to the ones that have stood out to me as really impactful, they're the ones that in general convey passion about what they do. For example, communicating to the reviewer how important this work is to you, or how excited you are about it, or how much going to this meeting means to you, or means to your project to help it move forward. I think personal statements that get some aspect of that into it are the ones that end up making most sense to a reader, to a reviewer, I mean, about why a travel award would be really beneficial for that person to attend the meeting. So in general, the types of things that people might want to include, and as I said, there is no one-size-fits-all formula for this. It could include, for example, something about you overcoming a hurdle in your personal life, whether that's during your education, going through university, or perhaps through your family life, particularly if you had a disadvantaged childhood. I think those are all things which are relevant to put into a personal statement because they indicate the types of adversity you may have had to overcome to get to this point, or perhaps even adversity, moving forwards. If you're a member of an underrepresented group in the sciences, I think it's entirely appropriate that you could expand upon that in a personal statement for the reviewer. I wouldn't repeat the abstract in detail. Sometimes people will go ahead and just re-describe what they've done. And whilst maybe you could do that and emphasize a different part of the work, perhaps you could say that this discovery is really important for people who have cochlear implants, and go into why that is. That could be a good thing to say, perhaps. But in general, I wouldn't repeat the work in detail because I've got the abstract for that. I don't need to read it again. I'm hoping to hear from you about what makes you tick, essentially. I do think it's a good thing to say why you want to attend the ARO meeting. Is it because there are some sessions that are really important to you? If you're working on inner ear development, is there an inner ear development session that covers topics that would be really relevant to what you're doing? And as an extension of that, are there any particular scientists that you'd particularly like to meet that would really help you push your project forward, whether that's by bouncing your data off them or perhaps even building a collaboration? So I think those are ways that those are types of things you could talk about in your personal statement. And I also think that, and this is very personal in terms of your situation, I do think it's appropriate to include information about financial hardship if you are from a smaller lab that perhaps has lower amounts of funding. And if a travel award really is the thing that is the difference between you going and not going, then I think it's, again, entirely appropriate that you could talk about that in an abstract. So I think those are the overall things I'd like to say. I know Kata and Melanie are on the call, so if you have anything you'd like to add to that, please also feel free to say something. It's very personal, as I said. I think a good personal statement is one that conveys passion about what you want to do, but it could contain any of those things in any particular combination.
I actually have more of a question in regards to the system itself. So when you first started on talking about the travel awards and how it's being reviewed, I just wanted to, and also the Don Henderson Award, I just wanted to kind of ask on whether Don Henderson Award for international students, there's a higher value that's being given. And then my second question is regarding the luncheon, the Travel Awards luncheon, because when I was awarded the Travel Award couple of years ago, I went to this luncheon, and I think it was great to hear the lecture from the speaker that was chosen to come to give the lecture. And I was wondering if this luncheon was also open to non-travel awardees, or if it's just open to travel awardees.
Okay, those are great questions. Thanks for those. So I'll take them one by one. So the first one was about the Don Henderson Award. That one has been set by the family to be $1,000 per awardee. So we don't make a distinction there between whether they are international or domestic. And I should also highlight that if you get one of those, then you don't get the travel award. It's essentially $1,000 rather than $500. So you don't get $1,500, for example. They're not additive. So that was the first question. The second one was about the travel luncheon. So just to recap what this is, everyone who wins a travel award is invited to come to a luncheon. Typically, I think it's on the first day of the meeting, and all the awardees get together. The travel award committee members will be there, so you get to meet everybody. And we also have a distinguished speaker that we invite. And we've had some really great talks in the past. They tend to be more kind of like career path talks rather than just hard science. So people talk about where they came from in life, their journey through their scientific career, some of the kind of the important lessons they've learned along the way or mistakes they've made. They kind of talk more about those types of experiences rather than just the experiments they've done. And the luncheon is open only to the travel award winners. We don't invite anyone else to those. And I should say that one thing I forgot to mention is, of course, for the last 2 years, unfortunately, we haven't been able to travel in person to attend the ARO meeting. And in previous years before COVID reared its head, what we would do is we had rules in place whereby it's difficult to get 2 travel awards in a row. So let's say in 2018, if you were awarded a travel award, we make it more difficult for you to win again in 2019. By changing the scoring system, we essentially limit the maximum score that an awardee can get the second year after being awarded the previous year, as a way to make sure we don't get the same people winning every year. It's a way to make sure that the travel award scheme gets spread out over more labs, essentially. Of course, when it happened with COVID, people still won travel awards, but kind of didn't get to go anywhere. So we suspended that rule for the COVID times. And because this year, hopefully, is the first year back to traveling in person, if you did win a travel award last year, that won't count for this year. So essentially, we're starting from year 0. And if you did win one last year, you have the same chance of getting one this year. You won't be penalized for that.
I also had another question as part of your presentation. So you've mentioned that results and methods section, it's good to have them kind of in one section. And I completely agree with that. But I think ARO, the way how ARO abstract is formatted is that they'd like to have the introduction, they'd like to have the methods section separate from the results from the conclusion. And I was wondering if you think that would be okay for us to merge, or like, I think when we had Dr. Matt Kelly last coffee hour, he did say that it's good to read the guidelines that the conference offers. And so I just wanted to see where you stand on that, like whether it's good to do the merging or whether we have to stick with the guidelines that are provided.
Right, so I hope I don't get into trouble here. So yeah, so I would stick to what Matt Kelly has said, because he's in charge of the program committee who review all the abstracts. I think I was just trying to get to the point that I personally find it easier to read if it's merged in, but I think doing it the way ARO has suggested is of course perfectly fine. But I would recommend that you do interleave discussion points along with your results as you go along, because that absolutely makes the abstract easier to read and more impactful. It's easier to extract the information. I can see a question from Janelle. Are attendees like on instructor or staff scientists, research scientist positions eligible to apply for travel awards? No, they are not. I think that's explicitly excluded in our application materials. So I'm not sure everyone's aware, but postdoc star positions are limited to 5 years, I believe, by NIH. So essentially, if you're a 6th-year postdoc, you would be classified as a research scientist position as opposed to a postdoctoral fellow. And same for as an instructor. So whilst people are thinking about perhaps about other questions, I hope we go from Ipe Kishimoto. I might have missed what you said about this, but what are the odds of winning the Travel Award? The odds are ever in your favor. A quote from Hunger Games. Last year, the pay line was 40%, or just a smidgen below 39%. So I think the odds are very good. I know that other societies, some of the bigger ones perhaps, don't have that good of a pay line. So I think the odds are very good for a Travel Award. It's almost 1 in 2, basically. That's not to say that if you write a bad abstract, you'll get one, but I think, you know, if you write a good abstract, you've got a very good chance of getting one. Yeah. And that's down to the generosity of, I should say, the NIDCD, who fund an R13 conference grant that helps pay for these awards, and also for the sponsors of the meeting that help defray the costs of running the meeting at the midwinter meeting in Orlando.
Melanie?
Can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say one little thing about the personal statements, because I mean, what JB said, Dr. Bird said about like how you should write your personal statement, that was like spot on. And I just wanted to add that, you know, writing, I really want to network and I really want to meet all the other really awesome people. That's kind of like not really helpful. So just try to think of something that, as Jonathan said, will make you stand out and will just make the reviewer think about, you know, as somebody who's not really thinking about why they really deserve to have a travel award, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's great, Melody. I think, you know, specifics rather than generic statements are really good. So there's a comment here from Sally Thornton. Hi, I was a neurophysiology postdoc for 5 years, and then I had a large career break and now work in a completely different area of hearing sciences and am in my 3rd year of this postdoc. Would I be eligible? ? I would need to think about that and talk to the society. If you could write to us, Sally, we can take it under consideration. Whilst people might be thinking about other questions, I also wanted to take this opportunity to ask you as trainees who are actually applying for these awards, you know, what could we do to make things better? Or are there parts of the process that you think aren't very good or could be changed? I'm imagining that everyone wants to have the amount increased, and we've talked about that with council, and we'll continue to advocate for that. Certainly we had some success having the international award level increased, but of course, as we increase the award value, the number of awards goes down. So there's a kind of a trade-off with that, the pay line goes down. So yeah, if anyone has any question or anyone has any thoughts about that, please welcome to put them in the chat, or you can email them directly to Ali anonymously if you want, or to me directly. We'd love to hear feedback from you about how this scheme is serving you, because that's the whole goal of this, is to help you go to the meeting and help you have a good experience and enjoy presenting your science and have a great time.
All right, does anybody have any questions? I'd also like to put the question that Dr. Bird has asked in the chat, if all of you would be willing to answer through the chat, or you're welcome to email Dr. Bird separately as well.
And I'll pop my my email in the chat box as well. And you're very welcome to email me directly, or any members of the travel committee. Our membership is on the ARO website. You can find that pretty easily through Google.
Sounds great. All right, any other questions? So I guess I have another question in regards to the personal statement, it seems like the personal statement this year is a little bit more focused on the rationale for attending the conference. Does that are you still looking for a personal statement, or are you more looking for why you want to attend the conference?
Well, we ask for a personal statement, but we don't specify what it should contain on the advert. And I've given a few examples of what it could contain, but I don't think any one of those, you don't have to do any of those. It's really an opportunity for you to say what it is that drives you in science, what it is excites you about your work, why going to the conference is important, how it could help you build your career or meet people who are important to furthering your science. It can cover any of those things. It really is just to say something different than I'd really like to go to Orlando, for example, just to kind of differentiate from that. So
Okay, sounds great.
Because at the end of this, the Travel Award Committee has a hard time sometimes because we have to make decisions about who gets funding and who doesn't, and that can be difficult. And these types of things really help us prioritize candidates and stratify them, because sometimes just reading the science, it can be tricky to do that without a personal statement.
And is there anything that you're looking for in a CV, or is just a CV, is there any particular information that the Travel Award is looking for, or is it just just a regular CV that we all consider with our information, where we got our education and publication? Okay.
Yeah, I think a standard CV is good. And normally I read that just to check that the person is a graduate student, the person is, because there are a few categories, like an instructor, for example, someone mentioned in a question. I just check for that to make sure they fit the criteria. We don't do any additional background research beyond that. So we take your CV at face value. You can probably omit things like your personal hobbies, that kind of thing. But yeah.
Great. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Let me wait about a minute.
No problem. And I will look forward to reading them all, or at least 60 of them.
Yeah, just to remind everybody, the abstract is due at the end of this month on September 30th. So, so hopefully this session was helpful to everybody. And I hope you all good luck with writing the abstract. Okay, so I don't think there's any other questions. So I think we're going to wrap up today. So thank you, Dr. Bird, and also Dr. Melanie Barzak for contributing to the discussion. And if you have any questions, the ARO staff is always on the lookout. Dr. Bird has also left his email address on the chat, and we're always here to answer any questions. So thank you, everybody, and good luck with submitting all the abstracts. And thank you, Dr. Bird, again, and also thank you, Ali and Julie, for being here today. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for the invitation.